Welcome to the next episode of Keeping It Real with Adi Mopidevi. Thanks for being here. Today, I have a very distinguished guest, Mitch Taylor. I've had really fun hearing to some of the long and great stories he's got. Mitch is a VP of IT with Pacific Southwest Container and has got a long, illustrious IT career and has great stories to share with us today. Mitch, thank you for being here. Really glad to have you on this show.
Thank you. It's my privilege to be here.
Thank you. Mitch, could you talk a little bit about yourself so that our audience get to know your background and what do you do right now?
Yeah, I am currently the VP of IT for Pacific Southwest Container. We are a prominent packaging solutions provider. So we basically make and sell empty boxes and help people create solutions for their specific packaging needs.
Okay, that's great. Talk to us about the scale of operations a little more. Like, how big are the operations? How big is the team? What problems do you solve on a regular basis?
Sure. Yeah, I think our team is about a half dozen. And in addition to that, we also utilize outside resources. I think it's important to have a mix of internal and external expertise. Nobody knows it all. And so we try to spread that out and engage whoever we need, depending on the situation. As far as the market goes, we play in all kinds of spaces and we pride ourselves on the interactions that we have with our customer base, that white glove treatment and high levels of customer service. But we also want to utilize technology as a competitive advantage and something to help make us better at what we do. And so while we take a lot of pride in our levels of productivity and efficiency and how quickly we can turn products around and deliver on time reliably, we found, especially in our industry, a lot of processes are manual processes that date back to a lot of old ways of doing things. I was brought in about a year and a half ago to elevate that and to help make technology a competitive advantage. As you will know, there's lots of technologies out there now that can bring benefits. Certainly AI being probably the most recent buzzword that everyone seems to be throwing around these days. And so we're looking at projects and have already done some projects that have allowed us to utilize technology such as AI. But really, what we're looking to do is to utilize technology as a tool in our tool belt, something that can help make people better at what they do. Well, I think there's a lot of fear these days about AI and technology replacing jobs, and I don't really see that it's going to replace a lot of jobs. I think what we will see is that people who understand how to utilize technology such as artificial intelligence will replace people who don't understand how to utilize those technologies. So I think we really want to utilize technologies across the board, be that cloud technologies, AI, or even on-premise technologies as well, because I know we have a lot of manufacturing equipment that has its own command and control systems. So we have to keep those going as well. And I try to bring technology to bear in a way that helps the business. As exciting as the gadgets might be and the shiny new thing, my goal has always been the business application of technology and how that can revolutionize how a business is able to operate.
You've been working with a range of companies across, even in your earlier stints when you're working for yourself as a consultant and stuff like that. So, when it comes to specifically domain as shipping and logistics or whatever, the current place you're in, what are the stark differences between other verticals and this particular one? What's your thought?
I think for starters, our particular industry has been very low tech. It's been around a long time, well over 100 or 150 years. There's been box making out of paper. And so it's a fairly low tech industry. But I think what we're finding is that technology is touching all industries, right? It's revolutionizing
Yes.
and changing the market in all kinds of areas. I think a great example of that was when Uber and Lyft really upset the apple cart when it came to taxi and transportation. And so
Yes.
we see some industries that really had not been part of the dot-com boom, the bubble that we saw back in the late 90s. We're starting to see other industries being impacted and revolutionized with some of these technologies. From my standpoint, our vertical, in some ways, not much different from others, but I think what we're starting to see is even the large players in our industry, the international companies, paper companies, they see the writing on the wall and they understand that we just can't continue to operate business as usual in the old ways. And I think that even they see the need to modernize. And it's not just about operational efficiencies, it's also about utilizing technology to integrate and interface with customers and vendors. I think we're starting to see a bigger need for those electronic interactions, not pushing paper back and forth or trading emails. From our standpoint, we see that this is what it's going to take to really take us to the next level. And so there's only so many people to do the job. So we're really excited about how some of these new technologies are going to help make the people that we do have that much more efficient.
You're absolutely. I see that. I think it's a very important aspect to understand for IT leaders, especially in these diverse domains. We don't know when technology shift is going to demand something significant out of them. So, having said that, especially these organizations which are manufacturing heavy or which have production lines, equipment to manage, etc. I remember you telling me that you've scaled companies from like 35 to 40 million to 120 million with the same equipment. How is it even possible? So, talk to us a little bit more about the strategies you employed, what worked out, what are your learnings from that space?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think if you're going to make things like that and take things to that level, it really requires, first and foremost, a really good understanding of the business and the market. I've said before, sometimes people come to me and want me to automate a bad process, right? And I tell them that all that's going to give them is a bad automated process. We need to optimize and improve the underlying process first, and then we can look at automation. And so I think the lessons that I learned out of scaling prior businesses and things to that degree is that you really have to understand the need and the business process behind it, not just throw technology at a problem. I think sometimes we get ourselves into trouble when we try to get the cart ahead of the horse and implement some newfangled technology, but we haven't really understood the business problem. So I think what I have really tried to do throughout my career is to understand the business processes and the needs behind it, and then utilize the technology and the automation simply as a tool to get there, to get from point A to point B.
I see that. I keep hearing this from almost every leader I have in the podcast. You have to understand the business problem, and you describe the same thing too. Let me ask you this question out of curiosity. Why is it so hard to understand the business problem?
I think business is difficult, right? And there's so many moving pieces. I think if there were one simple, easy answer, then everybody would have it. And I think that answer changes over time. I think the headwinds that we're facing today are different than the headwinds that we faced last year and the year before. I know we just came out of COVID the last couple of years. That fundamentally changed our business and our industry. More direct shipping to end users at their homes instead of them driving to the store to pick up goods. And so we saw a lot of paper and packaging needs during that time, and it really changed things. We saw the market greatly expand during that time, and we had to struggle even to keep up with the demand. Now that we're coming out of COVID, now we're seeing different headwinds, different problems. So now the market has stabilized somewhat as far as the number of boxes needed, but we're seeing now that different things are at play. We're seeing that customers now are facing their own headwinds. In certain markets, we see long-time customers that are seeing decreases right in market conditions in their own space. I think it just forces you to have to be agile and flexible. I think if there's any constant throughout my 30 years of being in the business world, it's that you have to be ready for change. The disruption that we're seeing now with certain technologies like the gig economy, certainly the cloud was back in the day and AI is today. We're seeing that the way that business is done is changing, but fundamentally the same things still need to happen. I think people get caught up thinking maybe that some of these technologies are silver bullets, and they're really not. They're just a different way, maybe a better way, maybe a more efficient way to do some of these things, but the same things still have to be done. Our product still has to be manufactured on time. That means by making sure that you understand the schedules, the planning, the raw materials, the shipping and logistics constraints. So we still have to do a lot of the same things, but we just do them a little bit differently now as we work our way through there. So I think the reason that understanding the business problem is difficult is that it is a little bit of a moving target, and the headwinds that we face in the industry and around the world. And certainly, I'm not sure that anyone really saw COVID coming, right? If you were to ask people 6 months or a year before COVID, I don't think anybody saw that coming. So to be flexible and to do what you need to do. And those things affect more than just our production and our industry. It affects the people that are actually showing up every day doing the job. We have to keep our people safe. We have to make sure that our business processes account for those things. And we have to make sure that we're taking care of our customers.
Absolutely. As you give a flavor of this, I think one of the really interesting things I've learned from you after our initial conversations is around how you coined these terms, OT and IT, and how you spoke, how well they need to work in coordination with each other. So, could you introduce these terms to our audience and just talk to us about how they need to work in cohesion to actually achieve the goals of the organization?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been in IT my whole professional career, but I have headed up IT for almost 25 years now, and it has been in manufacturing environments. So what that means is that we have both IT, which most people are familiar with, but we also operate what people may not be as familiar with if they're not from manufacturing, And that is something that we call OT, or operational technologies. And those are the technologies that are in use on the plant floor. And they're very different in some ways because even though they still involve electronics, you still have devices that plug in and still have devices that have to communicate with each other over a network. They're different from the standpoint that these are the things that control the actual machinery. They control electric motors, they control safety mechanisms, photo eyes, light curtains, and things that can shut machines down if a human being or some other object were to come in close proximity, for instance, to a rotating knife or something that might cause harm. So we have those operational technology items that unfortunately carry even more risk in the event of a cyber attack or downtime. And unfortunately, from a cybersecurity standpoint, we're seeing the attackers out there really understanding that now, and they're really starting to target a lot of those OT systems. And that's very scary because the OT systems are not even just on the floor. We see OT devices in hospitals and hospital networks, in healthcare, food and beverage manufacturing, and even back to cities that are operating water treatment facilities and things. So these OT systems are the ones that, for instance, control whether or not fluoride or chlorine is added to the drinking water and in what quantities they're added to the drinking water. You can certainly see pretty quickly why an attacker would see value in threatening those systems. If you can take those hostage or threaten to shut it down or affect a particular municipality's drinking water or the safety of the supply, then that holds a lot of power. I think from people that are in high levels of IT or cybersecurity like myself, we find ourselves constantly having to battle these outside forces to protect not just the typical information technology or IT side of things, but also the operational technology, the OT side, because when it comes down to it, we have to obviously keep our people safe around this machinery, but we also have to continue to operate the business. And what we find is if our IT side is attacked by ransomware, for instance, that would be a nuisance. And certainly having to recover from backups and things like that would certainly see us working long hours around the clock and would not be ideal. But that pales in comparison to the kind of damage that could be done if our OT networks were attacked successfully, where production is brought down, and certainly the cost to the organization is much higher for an hour or 5 hours or 10 hours.
Yeah, and it probably causes a lot of direct impact to customers because it affects the product and we don't know how to even recover probably from it, right? The cost is way higher. So,
Absolutely.
mhm. Help me understand this. Say, for example, now that the aspect of OT and IT, and especially in manufacturing companies, is getting critical, if at all we have to lay down a plan or rather a strategy for handling cybersecurity, or I would even call it IT optimization. Let me bucket them together. I'm hoping those are the two major functions what you have under you. What kind of guidance would you have for organizations or for your fellow CIOs? How should they really look at it top down? Because it's a big piece of cake. It's a big problem. You're talking about optimizing on one side and you're talking about safety on the other, and you have IT and OT to deal with. How do you even go about it?
Absolutely. Yes, there is a lot to that, and it is a big piece of cake, as you
Uh-huh.
say. Yeah, so I think priority wise, we obviously have to have certain protections in place. Standard operating procedure would dictate certain things being in place, such as firewalls and antivirus, anti-malware, all the usual suspects. But I think beyond that, you see a lot about this now. In fact, some of my cyber events that I've been the keynote speaker at have certainly focused on this as well. But that is the human element, the
Mhm.
what we found was back in the day, and we saw this even with automobiles, where it was very easy for a thief to break into a car in a parking lot and steal it. Back during the 90s and 2000s, manufacturers started making their cars much more resilient. The alarm systems, the
Mhm.
interconnects, they just became much harder to steal. And unfortunately, what that led to was a rise in carjacking, stoplights, and things like that. Instead of trying to break into a car in an empty parking lot because the car itself was so hard to circumvent, unfortunately, what the bad actors did was they turned to circumventing the human. And we're seeing that now in OT and IT. The systems actually are fairly good today. If you've adhered to best practices, if you have industry standard firewalls in place and antivirus, anti-malware, anti-ransomware, there's a lot of great systems out there now to help protect you electronically. So what we're finding is that the bad actors, the threat actors, have really turned their attention to the humans and utilizing social engineering attacks and business email compromise and different things. They can circumvent one person that has legitimate access into a facility like ours. They have the keys to the kingdom. But I think what we're seeing is that humans now more than ever are finding themselves directly under attack from these actors because they find that the humans are easier to circumvent than the technology.
I think you bring up a very valid point. I was talking to another gentleman, John Walsh, and he was mentioning the same thing. The biggest people I need to protect are the users because how well I keep them educated because I can't get away from them. I can manage the systems, I can get the systems down, but how do I handle these vulnerabilities? As a leader, how did you handle these kind of challenges within your organization? Or rather, what kind of strategies have worked and gave results to you while you're bringing your organization up and running?
Absolutely. I like to gamify it, right? We talk about user awareness training, and unfortunately, a lot of user awareness training that I've experienced in the past is just not very interesting to listen to. And
Yeah.
so what we get is people technically going through the motions of supposedly watching it and making their way through it, but they don't really absorb what it's trying to tell them. I like to make it more interesting and gamify the presentation. And what I find is if you can really help people to understand, maybe even through a demonstration, for instance, I would encourage IT leaders, get out there, play around with some of the technologies that allow you to mimic your boss's voice or work with them directly. Put together a campaign where maybe your boss supposedly has this message for people around bonus time or whatever, and play it up and let people fall for it in a safe environment and really understand what's possible. So I think playing with some of these technologies ourselves, understanding what's possible, and then making it interesting for the user so that it will stick with them. I find that crafting an interesting and memorable storyline around some of these things really helps drive the point home and helps them to remember it. Because if you're just presenting them with black and white information in a dry format, they're never going to really take it to heart. But I think helping them understand, maybe even picking out some edge cases, right, where someone utilized AI voice capability to mimic someone and show them how that actually played out in the real world. I love to find some of these examples on the edge that are really super interesting and frankly, a great application of those technologies in the very wrong way and use those right to highlight what can happen. And that's not saying that everyone in your organization is going to face these types of attacks, but to understand, for instance, we had a case that I personally know about where someone received a phone call supposedly from their boss, and it sounded like their boss accent and everything, and wanted them to transfer money to a certain account. And so they went through the protocol of reaching out via email and other things. And yes, they got all the signs pointed to the fact that this was a legitimate request. Turns out it was not because the voice had been replicated with AI and the email account had been compromised and different things. So I think we also need to take a step back and look at our standard operating procedures relative to what protections are in place to make sure we check off the list before money changes hands. And I think today I would almost argue you almost need a face-to-face approval process anymore. They used to say, make sure that you reach out via email, make sure you reach out via phone call. But anymore, with some of the things that are going on, a lot of those things can be compromised and it's not even really safe. So I think back to your point, you have to present it in a way that's memorable, in a way that people will remember, and do it on a regular basis and in a way that gamifies it so that it will stick with them.
It's a great point. I've one last question. Just excited to listen with the wealth of experience you've shared. What is that great challenge or a problem you have solved in your career and you're really proud of? This is what we have pulled off. Because I see the wisdom, I see where you're coming from. I would really like to hear a great success story of ours at the end. Would you mind sharing it with us?
Absolutely. So we had a situation, and this is a while back, but had a situation where the number of orders coming in were just too great. We had people manually inputting orders into the system, and although the system was optimized, it made order entry very quick. We could enter an order in under 60 seconds, but when you're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of orders a day and not very many reps to enter those orders, you still had a problem. And so we implemented a system that allowed us to accept those orders in an electronic fashion. This goes back to my point before about how people think that technology is going to displace their job. What happened was customer service reps initially were scared that they were going to lose their jobs when all this automation came into play. What we actually found was no, the automation allowed about 90% of the orders to flow in automatically directly from our customers' ERP systems and into ours. What it really did was allow our customer service reps then to spend 100% of their time on only 10% of the orders orders, right? The 10% that are likely to cause us problems. And instead of having to split the 100% of their time across 100% of the orders. And so what we really found was number one, it did not eliminate any jobs. And I know those who were looking to cut costs maybe thought that was not a win, but I beg to differ because even though we didn't reduce payroll, we saw our productivity go through the roof. And it was because the customer service reps were able to spend 100% of their time dealing with those 10% of the orders that were very problematic, 10% of the orders that we were most likely to have have a quality defect or quality return on. So we saw productivity go up, we saw efficiency and effectiveness go up, but we also saw quality returns and defects go way down. And so because of that, actually, that's where you were talking about a business that could grow from 35 or $40 million a year to over $120 million a year on exactly the same number of people, exactly the same equipment. That's one of the reasons of how you do it is we utilized technology for what technology was good for, and we utilized our people for what humans are good for. And I'll tell you, technology is great at enforcing the rule, and they can enforce the rules day in and day out, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and do the same thing over and over very well. But systems are not great at handling exceptions, at handling things they've never seen before. Hopefully with AI that will get some better, but I still contend that there will always be a need for good people because people are very good at handling situations they've never seen before and driving that to a good outcome. So I think what we saw there was we allowed our systems to shine doing the automated stuff, but we also allowed our humans to shine doing what people do well. And to me, that was a win. And we saw, again, good things happen on the quality and productivity side, both, and as well as efficiency.
Wow, that's a great story. Thank you so much, Mitch. It was wonderful talking to you. I really enjoyed the conversation and the wealth of the experience you brought in. I'm sure it adds a lot of thoughts and new thought provoking ideas for our listeners as well. I appreciate you being on the show. Glad to have you here.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.